The heat in a Crusader tank doesn't just sit on you. It enters you. It's a heavy, greasy thing, pressing against the back of your throat, tasting of recycled air and impending violence. Or maybe that was just the fear. It's hard to say now. 80 years creates a lot of fog, and sometimes I wonder if I'm remembering the desert, or just the inside of the blast furnace back at the Austin Works in Longbridge. We were sitting on the start line at Alamein. I think it was October. Yes, late October. Because the nights were supposed to be cooling down, but inside that steel coffin, it was a sweltering 100 degrees of nervous sweat. The smell is what stays with me most. Not the glory, not the flags. Just the stench of hot oil. Cordite and 3 other men who hadn't washed in a week. It smelled like a shift change at the factory, right when the stamping machines have been running hot for 12 hours and the coolant is starting to burn. I was up in the turret for a moment. I shouldn't have been. I was the driver. My place was down in the hole, but the wireless set was playing up again. The No. 19 set. A temperamental box of valves and wires that hummed with the same erratic energy as a drunk foreman. "It's gone fuzzy again, Stan," the operator said. Or maybe it was the commander. Names slip away like grease off a polished bearing. "Let's call him Miller." Miller looked at me with eyes wide as saucers. I tapped the gauge of the wireless, a habit from the assembly line. "Percussive maintenance." "It's the heat, Miller. The valves are sweating just like us." The static hissed in our headsets, a rhythmic. It sounded like a file against rough iron. I fiddled with the dial, trying to tune in the net. We needed that order. Without the order, we were just 4 blokes sitting in a tin can waiting to be opened. I looked over at the loader. He was a kid. Just a boy, really. 17, 18, he was shaking. Not a shiver, but a vibration, like a flywheel off balance. He was staring at the breech of the 2-pounder gun like it was going to bite him. "Oi," I said, my voice tinny in the intercom. "You ever work a stamping press, lad?" The kid looked up, blinking. "No, Stan. Grocery delivery." "Right. Well, this here," I slapped the breech of the gun, "is just a delivery system, see? Same mechanics. A piston goes back, a piston goes forward. Back in Birmingham, I had a press named Big Bertha. She'd jam if you looked at her wrong. You know how I fixed her?" The static cut out for a second, leaving a gap of silence. The kid shook his head. "I sang to her," I lied. "I never sang to a machine in my life. I swore at them. But the kid needed something. She liked a bit of Vera Lynn. You treat this gun like a lady, and she won't jam on you. Just a rhythm. Load, clunk, bang. Load, clunk, bang. Like packing groceries." He managed a weak smile. The vibration in his hands slowed down. I dropped back down into the driver's compartment. It was a tight squeeze, claustrophobic enough to make your chest ache. The seat was hard leather, worn smooth. My world narrowed down to the vision slit and the levers in my hands. It felt like sliding into the control booth of a crane. Only this crane was carrying high explosives, and we were the payload. The engine behind me was idling, a Liberty V12. A beast of an engine. It rumbled through the floor plates, vibrating up through my boots. It was a comforting feeling. That mechanical heartbeat. As long as it was thumping, we were alive. I watched the temperature gauge. She was running hot, always running hot. Then, the static in my headset cleared. It was like the sun breaking through the smog over Birmingham. Simple, 2 words to end the world. I didn't think. I just worked. Clutch in, gear engaged. The gears meshed with a heavy that I felt in my teeth. I eased the clutch out, and the Crusader lurched. That first movement is always the worst. It's the moment you commit. We rolled forward, the track squealing against the drive sprockets. We crossed the imaginary line in the sand, the start line, and just as the nose of the tank dipped into a shallow depression, the radio didn't just fuzz out. It died. Not the hiss of static, not the crackle of interference, just absolute, dead silence. I tapped my headset. Nothing. I checked the connection box. Nothing. It was as if someone had cut the power cable to the whole factory floor. The roar of the engine was deafening, screaming at 2,000 RPM. But inside the helmet, I was stone deaf. We were moving into the dark, towards guns we couldn't see, and we were entirely, terrifyingly alone. The dark wasn't dark. That's the thing the movies get wrong. They show you night battles as shadows and moonlight. Alamein wasn't dark. It was a kaleidoscope of lethal light. Through my vision slit, the world was strobing. The muzzle flashes from the artillery barrage behind us turned the desert floor into a flickering black and white film reel that had jammed in the projector. And the tracers, Lord, the tracers, green balls of fire from the Jerrys, red from us. They floated through the air lazily, deceptively slow, weaving patterns that looked like the sparks flying off a grinding wheel. Only these sparks would tear a man in half. I was fighting the steering levers. The ground was chewed up, craters, rocks, soft sand. The Crusader bucked and slammed. It felt less like driving and more like wrestling a drunk bear. But there was something else. A shudder. It wasn't the terrain. I know machines. I know the difference between a bump in the road and a sickness in the transmission. Every time I shifted down to traverse a ridge, I felt it, a hesitation, a slip. It vibrated through the soles of my boots, distinct from the engine's roar. It felt like a tooth missing on a cog, catching every few rotations. I whispered, gripping the levers until my knuckles were white. I drove by instinct and terror. The air coming in through the vision slit was thick with dust and the acrid, biting taste of cordite. It coated my tongue. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry as ash. Hard left, traverse left, the commander's voice crackled. The intercom was working, even if the radio to the outside world wasn't. I hauled on the left stick. The tracks bit, slewing the tank sideways. Steady through the slit, I saw it. A flash in the darkness, low to the ground. A German anti-tank gun. It looked like a camera flash going off, over and over. Gunner target. 800 yards, on, fire. The tank rocked violently as our 2-pounder fired. The breech block slamming back sounded like a sledgehammer hitting an anvil inside a closet. The smell of propellant filled the fighting compartment, sharp and stinging. I saw the shell hit. A spray of dirt and sparks right near the enemy flash. Sheared, up 200, the loader, the kid, was working. I could feel his movements through the chassis, the frantic rhythm I'd told him to find. Fire, the second shot was true. A massive eruption of dirt and fire swallowed the German gun. For a second, just a second, the fear vanished. It was replaced by a surge of adrenaline, so potent it felt like electricity. We were doing it. We were a machine, a perfect assembly line of destruction. Everything was meshing. The gears, the men, the gun. We were invincible. I shifted up, pushing the engine. The transmission shuddered again, harder this time, a metallic groan that made my stomach drop. But I ignored it. We were pushing through. We were going to break the line. I saw the gap in the minefield tape. I gunned the engine, aiming for the black space between the tracers. Then the world turned white. It wasn't a sound. It was too big for sound. It was a physical blow, like a giant hand had reached down from the sky and swatted the tank. A blinding, magnesium-white flash engulfed the vision slit, searing my retinas. The impact threw me forward, slamming my chest against the steering levers and my head against the periscope housing. The tank slewed violently to the right, the tracks locking up, grinding to a halt. Then silence. The roar of the V-12 was gone. The shouting in the intercom was gone. The battle outside was gone. There was only a high-pitched ringing, a singular, piercing note drilling into the center of my brain. I blinked, trying to clear the white spots from my eyes, trying to remember how to breathe, but the air was gone, replaced by a heat so intense it felt like the inside of a furnace door had just been kicked open. Darkness. It wasn't the absence of light. It was a physical weight, a heavy, suffocating blanket of soot and steel that pressed against my face. The ringing in my ears was a solid thing, a high-frequency scream that drowned out the world, vibrating in the marrow of my teeth. I tried to inhale, but the air had turned to poison. It tasted of ozone, scorched rubber, and the sickening, copper tang of atomized blood. My lungs seized, rejecting the foul mixture, and I retched. Dry and violent, my forehead slamming against the cold steel of the steering lever. The pain was a jagged bolt of lightning that split my skull, momentarily clearing the white static from my vision. "Out! Get us out!" The voice was distant, distorted, like shouting underwater. I blinked, tears streaming from eyes stinging with acrid smoke. The darkness wasn't total anymore. Sparks were raining down from the turret basket, little angry fireflies dying on the oil-slicked floor plates. "Stan, the hatch, it's jammed." That was Billy, the kid. His voice was shredded, bordering on the hysterical screech of a trapped animal. I tried to move. My right arm responded, but my left hung heavy and numb. I reached up, my fingers brushing the sticky wetness on my temple. Blood, a lot of it. The concussion rolled over me in waves of nausea, the tank spinning around me even though we were dead still. It hit me harder than the shell had. It wasn't a fear. It was a biological imperative. The Crusader was no longer a tank. It was a tomb, an iron coffin shrinking by the second. The walls were closing in, the armor plating that was supposed to protect us now acting as the lid of a pressure cooker. I could feel the heat radiating from the rear bulkhead, the engine compartment. "Fire," I croaked. The words scraped my throat like sandpaper. Above me, the frantic clanging of steel on steel echoed like a church bell in hell. Billy was hammering on the turret hatch. "It won't budge," he screamed, sobbing now. "Stan, the ring is warped." "We're sealed in." I forced my head up, fighting the vertigo. Through the gloom, I saw the gunner, Mac, slumped over the breech guard. He wasn't moving. The turret hatch was useless. If the ring was warped from the impact, a sledgehammer wouldn't open it. That left the floor escape hatch. I unbuckled my harness, my fingers fumbling like sausages. I slid out of the driver's seat, dropping into the narrow, oil-stained well of the hull floor. It was tight, impossible tight. I had to contort my body, twisting sideways, my shoulder screaming in protest. The floor hatch was a heavy plate of steel beneath the gunner's position, secured by 4 heavy bolts. It hadn't been opened since we left the factory in Birmingham. It was painted over, caked in grease and desert grit. "Billy," I shouted, my voice finding its strength. "Leave it. Get down here." "Help me with Mac." I scrambled to the hatch, my hands slick with sweat and oil. I felt for the wrench in the clip on the wall. Gone, torn loose by the impact. It clawed at my throat. I scrabbled in the darkness, my fingers tearing at the debris on the floor. Spent casings, a canteen, a shattered periscope. "Stan, I smell gas." Billy dropped down beside me, coughing violently. "Find the wrench," I roared, slapping the floorboards. My hand closed around cold steel. A spanner, not the big one, but it would have to do. I jammed it onto the first bolt. I put my shoulder into it. The bolt screeched, a sound of tortured metal, and snapped free. The heat was rising. The air was getting thick, hazy. My head swam. I moved to the second bolt. It turned, reluctantly grinding through layers of paint, but it turned. The third bolt was stripped. The spanner slipped, taking a chunk of skin off my knuckles. I cursed, slamming the tool back onto the nut, hammering it down with the heel of my hand. I pulled. Nothing. I pulled until black spots danced in my vision. It gave a quarter turn, then stuck. "Stan," Billy whispered. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking up at the vision slit. I froze, through the ringing in my ears. I heard it, not the roar of engines, not the boom of artillery. Voices, close, too close, over here. I hear them, the crunch of jackboots on gravel, the distinctive metallic click of a rifle bolt being cycled. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. We weren't just burning, we were being hunted. The enemy was right outside the steel skin, and I was fighting a rusted bolt with a stripped head, while the temperature inside climbed toward an inferno. I gripped the spanner with both hands, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I squeezed my eyes shut, visualizing the threads, the rust, the metal. I was back at the factory. Just a stubborn press, just a jammed gear. I pulled. A soft sound came from behind the bulkhead, followed by a low, guttural roar. The interior of the Crusader was instantly bathed in a terrifying, flickering orange light. The fire had breached the fighting compartment. The fuel lines had gone. The temperature spiked violently. It wasn't just hot. It was an oven. The air shimmered, turning into a toxic soup of burning diesel and paint fumes. Every breath seared my throat, coating my lungs in soot. Billy gasped, his eyes rolling back in his head. "I can't," he murmured, and then he slumped forward, dead weight falling across my legs. "Billy," I shook him, but he was limp. The fumes were taking them. I looked at Mac. The gunner was conscious, but only just. His leg was trapped under the recoil guard, bent at a sickening angle. He looked at me, his eyes wide and terrified, reflecting the growing flames. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. I looked back at the third bolt. The spanner was useless. The head was completely rounded off now. Time dissolved. There was no war, no desert, no Germans outside. There was only the physics of leverage and the reality of fire. I reached for the toolkit box, kicking it open. I didn't look for a wrench. I grabbed the prybar, a 2-foot length of solid hexagonal steel I used for track tensioning. I jammed the tapered end into the seam of the hatch, right next to the stuck bolt. I didn't have the world. I had a rusted plate of British steel and the desperation of a dying man. I braced my feet against the transmission housing. I wedged my shoulder under the prybar. I screamed a primal, wordless sound that tore my vocal cords, and I pushed. I pushed with every ounce of strength I had, with the memory of every heavy crate I'd lifted in the factory, with the anger of every shift I'd worked. The metal shrieked. It was a high-pitched scream of yielding steel. The bolt didn't turn. It sheared. The head popped off like a bullet, pinging around the interior. The hatch dropped open. Cool, sweet night air rushed in, swirling with the smoke. The sand below looked like silk. I grabbed Billy by his collar. He was light, terrifyingly light. I shoved him through the hole, watching him tumble onto the sand beneath the tank. Then Mark, "Come on, mate," I choked out. I grabbed him under the arms. He screamed as I pulled him free of the recoil guard, his broken leg dragging. The fire was licking at the turret basket now, the heat blistering the skin on my neck. "Go," I shouted, pushing Mac's head and shoulders through the hole. I grabbed his belt and heaved, gravity taking over as he slid out. I was alone in the fire. The flames were curling around the ammunition storage. The paint on the walls was bubbling, peeling away like dead skin. I dived headfirst through the hatch. My hands hit the sand, and I scrambled, clawing at the ground, dragging my body out from under the belly of the beast. The air outside was cold, shockingly cold. I grabbed Mac's collar with one hand, Billy's with the other. "Move, move," I dragged them, inches at a time, my boots slipping in the loose sand. We were exposed. If the Germans were there, we were dead. But I couldn't see them. The smoke from our own tank was a thick screen, shielding us. We made it 10 yards, 20. We rolled into a shallow depression, an old shell crater. The ground shook. I turned my head just in time to see the turret of our Crusader lift into the air on a pillar of violent, white-hot flame. The ammunition cooked off, a rapid-fire series of explosions that sent tracers spinning wildly into the night sky like demonic fireworks. The heat washed over us in the crater, a final, angry breath from the machine I had loved. I lay there, face pressed into the sand, listening to the shrapnel rain down around us. Billy coughed. Mac groaned. We were alive. I rolled onto my back, staring up at the smoke-choked stars. My hands were shaking. Not a tremble, but a violent vibration I couldn't stop. I looked at them, black with oil, bloodied, skin missing from the knuckles. They were the same hands that used to assemble radiator grills in Birmingham. Back then, the noise of the factory was a comfort. The rhythmic thud of the presses, the hiss of steam, the clang of metal. It was the sound of creation. We were making things, building the future. No, the silence of the desert was heavier than the noise. I watched the skeleton of my tank burning in the distance. It wasn't a machine anymore. It was a carcass. I had spent my life fixing things, diagnosing the hum and whir of engines, coaxing life out of cold steel. But out here under the African moon, I had learned a different trade. I wasn't a mechanic of creation anymore. I was a mechanic of survival. I closed my eyes, but the image of the burning tank was burned into my eyelids. I knew then that the smell of burning diesel and the scream of shearing metal would never leave me. I could wash the oil from my skin, but the soot was in my soul. I was a factory worker who had seen the end of the assembly line, and it looked like hell. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.